The girl was 7 years old when he found her in the rain, and she demanded food instead of money, and that was the first thing that told him she was not ordinary. Hideki Moramoto had stopped his car that night for no reason he could later explain. He was not a man who stopped for things. He had built a life and an empire out of never stopping, out of the cold forward momentum that had carried him from nothing to the top of a world that respected only strength. But it was raining, hard, the kind of rain that turned the city to smeared light, and there was a child sitting alone against the wall of a shuttered building, soaked through, small, and something made him tell the driver to stop. He got out. He did not know why he got out. He stood over the child with an umbrella and looked down at her, and she looked up at him without the fear that most people showed him, and he reached into his coat and took out money. A great deal of it, more than the child had probably ever seen, and he held it out to her. Because money was the thing he understood, the thing he gave when he did not know what else to do. The girl looked at the money, and she shook her head. "I don't want money," she said. Her voice was small and clear and did not shake despite the cold. "Money's not food, and I can't eat it, and if I take it, someone bigger will just take it from me. I want food. Real food. If you're going to help me with something I can actually use tonight." Hideki Moramoto stood in the rain and stared at a 7-year-old who had just refused his money and demanded food instead. And something in the cold forward momentum of his entire life stuttered and stopped. "Before I take you through the 20 years that began in that rain, because this child grew into a woman, and the debt that started with a bowl of food came due in a courtroom 2 decades later in a way that saved everything the old man had built, stay with me. Subscribe if you're new, and drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from tonight. This story travels a long way, and I love to see how far." He took her to eat. He did not decide to. It simply happened, the way the important things happen, before you can talk yourself out of them. He took the soaked child to a place that was open at that hour, and he watched her eat, and he watched the careful, controlled hunger of a child who has learned not to trust that food will keep coming. And he asked her questions, and the answers rearranged something in him that he had believed was set for life. Her name was Akachi. She had no one. The details were the ordinary, terrible details of a child alone in a hard city, and Hideki, who had heard 1,000 hard luck stories and been moved by none of them, found himself moved by this one, and he did not understand why until much later. It was the refusal of the money. It was that she had looked at the thing he offered and seen through it to the thing she actually needed, and had asked for the real thing instead of the easy thing. In all his years at the top of a world built on people taking whatever they could grab, he had never once met anyone, adult or child, who refused the grab in favor of the true need. He had built an empire on the assumption that everyone grabbed, and a 7-year-old had just proven him wrong in the rain. He adopted her. It was not simple. A man in his position, with his reputation, taking in a child, raised questions and required arrangements. But he had the power to do difficult things, and he did this one. And Akachi came to live in the great cold house at the center of his empire. And the house, which had been ruled by fear for as long as anyone could remember, began, slowly, to change. Because it is very hard to keep a house entirely cold when there is a child in it who is not afraid. Funny thing about the debts that matter. They're never the ones written down. They're the ones a 7-year-old remembers in the rain. She did not become soft, and he did not make her soft, because he understood, having found her, exactly what she was, a person who saw clearly and refused the easy thing, and those were the 2 rarest and most valuable qualities he knew of, and he would not sand them off her. He raised her the way you raise something you have recognized as precious. He gave her everything, but not the way rich men usually give things, not as indulgence that rots the recipient. He gave her an education, a real and rigorous one, because he had watched her mind work in the rain, and he wanted to see what it could do fully fed and fully taught. He gave her the run of his library and answered her questions and argued with her at dinner as though she were an equal, which, as she grew, she increasingly became. She chose the law. That surprised some people, and did not surprise Hideki at all. The girl who had refused money and demanded food had grown into a young woman who saw straight to the heart of things and refused the easy version. And the law, done honestly, was exactly that. The discipline of seeing clearly and insisting on the true thing. She was brilliant at it. She went to the best schools his money could open the doors to, and then earned her place at them over and over on her own merits. Because the same clarity that had let her see through his money at 7 let her see through every problem a law school could put in front of her. She knew what he was. That was the thing that sat between them, unspoken for years, and then finally spoken. She was not a foolish or a naive woman, and she understood as she grew exactly what world she had been rescued into, and exactly how the man who had rescued her had built the empire that fed and taught her. She struggled with it. She was training to serve the law, and the man who had given her that training lived in many ways outside it. She did not pretend the contradiction away. She confronted it, with the same clarity she brought to everything, and she confronted him with it, and he did not flinch from the confrontation, because he had never once lied to her and would not start. "You are not a good man," she told him once, when she was grown, and she said it without cruelty, as a fact to be reckoned with. "I've known that for a long time. The world you built is not a clean world, and some of the things you've done are things I could never defend in the light. I know all of it, and I love you anyway, which is its own kind of problem I've had to make my peace with. Because you also pulled a freezing child out of the rain when no one else would even stop, and you fed her instead of paying her off. And you raised her to be exactly the kind of person who could see clearly enough to say all of this to your face. You made me into someone who has to judge you honestly. That's the strangest gift anyone ever gave. You built the very thing that would hold you to account." Hideki looked at the woman the rain-soaked child had become, and he said, "Yes, I know. I did it on purpose." She had not expected that. "I have spent my whole life," he said, "surrounded by people who tell me what I want to hear, because I am a man it is dangerous to tell the truth to. I built that. I made myself into someone the truth is dangerous around, and then I lived, for decades, starving for the truth, because I'd made it impossible to receive. And then I found a child in the rain who told me my money was useless and she'd rather have food, and I understood, standing there, that I had finally met someone who would tell me the truth even when the truth was inconvenient, because she was too young to have learned that I was a person you lie to. So I kept her. And I raised her to stay that way. I gave you the law, Akachi, and the clear sight, and the spine to say what you just said to me, knowing exactly what it would make you. I made you into the one person in my life who cannot be bought, and cannot be frightened, and will not tell me a comfortable lie. It's the best thing I ever did. It may be the only good thing I ever did. And I'd do it again. The thing about the powerful is that they can buy every kind of loyalty except the one that's worth anything, which is the loyalty of someone who could leave and doesn't, who sees exactly what you are and stays anyway. 20 years after the rain, the empire came under attack. Not the kind of attack Hideki's world usually produced. Not rivals, not violence, not the old brutal arithmetic he knew how to answer. This attack came through the law, which was the one weapon he had never fully learned to wield, because he had spent his life operating around it rather than within it. A coordinated legal assault, years in the making, assembled by enemies patient enough to understand that the way to destroy a man like Hideki Moramoto was not with force, but with paper, with courts, with charges, with the slow, crushing machinery of a legal system he had always treated as something to be evaded rather than fought inside. It was devastating precisely because it was legitimate. His enemies had done their work well. They had built a case, real in its documentation and lethal in its construction, that threatened to seize everything, to freeze the assets, dismantle the holdings, and end, through entirely lawful means, the empire that no illegal means had ever been able to touch. His usual tools were useless against it. You cannot intimidate a court. You cannot buy your way out of a case that has been built carefully enough to survive the buying. Hideki, for the first time in his long life, faced a threat he did not know how to answer, in a language he had never learned to speak, and he watched everything he had built begin to slide toward a cliff he could not stop it from going over. His lawyers were good. They were the best money could buy, and they told him, one by one in careful language, that the case was very strong, that the exposure was severe, that they would do what they could, but he should prepare for the worst. He heard the truth underneath their careful words, because he had spent his life hearing the truth underneath careful words. They thought he was finished. And then Akachi walked into it. She had built her own career, deliberately separate from him. She had wanted, needed to be a lawyer in her own right, on her own merits, untainted by the empire that had raised her. She had become, in 20 years, exactly what the 7-year-old in the rain had promised. Brilliant, clear-sighted, incorruptible, a formidable attorney with a reputation entirely her own. And when the assault on Hideki's empire began, she did the thing that no one, least of all Hideki, expected. She took the case. "You don't want me on this," Hideki told her when she came to him. "Akachi, listen to me. You've spent 20 years building a clean name, a career untouched by what I am. If you attach yourself to this, to me in open court, you tie your reputation to mine forever. Everything you built to be separate from me, you'll be throwing back into the same pot. I won't let you do it. I would rather lose the empire than have it cost you the thing you worked hardest for." "I know exactly what it costs," Akachi said. "I've done the math. I did it the way you taught me, all the way to the end, no comfortable lies. And I'm doing it anyway." "Why?" She looked at him, and for a moment she was 7 years old again, refusing his money in the rain, seeing clearly to the true thing beneath the easy thing. "Because 20 years ago, you stopped your car for no reason and pulled a freezing child out of the rain," she said. "And when you didn't know what else to do, you offered her money, and she told you money wasn't what she needed. And instead of driving away insulted, you took her to eat. You gave her the real thing instead of the easy thing. And then you spent 20 years and a fortune making her into a person who could see clearly and fight cleanly and win in exactly the kind of room where you're about to lose everything." She held his gaze. "You built the weapon that can save you. That's what you did. That night, in the rain, though neither of us knew it. You reached into a puddle and pulled out the one person in the world equipped to walk into that courtroom and win. I am the debt coming due. Let me pay it." The case was the hardest thing she had ever done, and she did it in the full light of open court, in front of everyone, tying her clean name forever to the man who had raised her. She did not defend what he was. She was too honest for that, and the case did not require it. What she did instead was dismantle the assault on its own terms, find the flaws in its construction that his other lawyers had missed, the overreach in its charges, the places where his enemies, in their patience and their thoroughness, had built something that looked lethal but had a fault line running through it that only a truly clear pair of eyes could see. She saw it because she saw everything clearly. It was the thing she had been since she was 7. And she took the fault line, and she opened it, and in front of a courtroom full of the people who had come to watch the old man finally fall, she saved his empire. It was not a small thing, and it did not happen in a single dramatic moment. Though, there was a moment. A moment when the case turned, when the thing she had found became undeniable, when the room understood that the assault which had seemed unstoppable was going to fail. And in that moment, Hideki Moramoto, who had feared nothing in decades, who had built and ruled and survived a world that ate the weak, sat in a courtroom and watched the child he had pulled from the rain save everything he had. And he wept, silently, openly, in front of everyone, because he understood exactly what he was watching. He was watching the only good thing he had ever done come back 20 years later to redeem all the things that were not good. She won. The empire stood. The enemies who had built their careful lethal case watched it collapse in the hands of a woman they had never accounted for, because they had done their research on Hideki Moramoto and had not understood that the most dangerous asset he possessed was not money or men or reach, but a daughter he had raised to be incorruptible, waiting to walk into exactly the kind of room they had chosen for their attack. Afterward, in the quiet, Akachi came to him. "You saved it," Hideki said. His voice was not entirely steady. "You saved all of it. And you paid the price I told you not to pay. Your name is tied to mine now, in the record, forever. You'll carry that." "I know," Akachi said. "I told you I did the math. I'll carry it." She sat down beside him, the way a small girl had once sat down beside him in the grass, the way a soaked child had once sat across a table and eaten with careful hunger. "But here's the thing you never quite understood, all these years, for all your clear sight about everyone else. You thought the debt ran one way. You thought you'd rescued me, pulled me out of the rain, fed me, raised me, given me everything. And you did. But I was never staying because I owed you. A debt would have been paid off years ago. You gave me far more than a rescue is worth. I stayed because I love you, which is not a debt, and cannot be repaid, and does not want to be. And I walked into that courtroom for the same reason. Not to settle accounts. Because you're my father, whatever else you are, and I was not going to watch them take you down without standing in front of you. That's not the debt coming due. That's just what love does. You spent your whole life unable to buy it, and you got it anyway, for free, from a girl who refused your money in the rain. That was always the joke of it. The one thing you wanted most was the one thing that was never for sale, and it walked up to you soaking wet and asked for dinner. Hideki Moramoto looked at his daughter, and he understood that she was right, that she had been right since she was 7, that she had always seen the true thing beneath the easy thing, including this one, the truest and least easy thing of all. The empire endured. It changed in the years after more than it had ever changed before, because a man who has watched his life saved by the one clean thing he ever made cannot go on exactly as he was. He listened to her more. He let her clear sight into corners of his world that had never known any light. He did not become a good man. It was too late for that, and both of them were too honest to pretend otherwise. But he became a man with a good person beside him, whom he trusted completely. And in a life like his, that was nearly the same thing, and closer than he had ever expected to come. Here is the thing the powerful spend their whole lives failing to learn, and Hideki Moramoto learned only because a child taught it to him in the rain. You cannot buy the things that actually matter. You can buy loyalty, and it will last exactly as long as your money does. You can buy fear, and it will protect you until someone less afraid comes along. You can buy every kind of allegiance the world sells, and every one of them will fail you in the courtroom, in the crisis, at the cliff's edge. Because purchased things have no reason to stay when the purchasing stops. The only loyalty worth anything is the kind that was never for sale. The kind that sees exactly what you are. Owes you nothing it hasn't already been repaid 100 times over, and stands in front of you anyway when the world comes to take you down. Hideki reached into a rainstorm expecting nothing and pulled out the one thing his fortune could never have bought him. He offered a freezing child money, and she taught him, at 7 and again at 27, the lesson he had spent a lifetime too rich and too frightened to learn, that some debts are not paid in cash, and the deepest loyalty is the kind that was never a debt at all.